Hello, and welcome back for real this time to the Thursday Night Podcast with me, Brady, and my co host, David. There's been more time than we had planned for between episodes, but in our defense, a lot less time than there was between the last two episodes. So we are making forward progress.
Next episode should be at a regular schedule.
yes. Very important words to say. David was off touring a non-contiguous U.S. state. Tried to kind of set up a backup plan. I forget how much I promised when we were recording versus what was in my head, so I don't know, listening back, if it's like, if I was like, there's going to be a pod on this day, whatever. It obviously didn't happen, took a week off. Fall camp is still going on for football. Not a lot of like concrete stuff coming out of that, which is, with no shade at all, how Del McGee and co. intended to be. They just aren't interested in playing the media leak game or the telling everyone what's going on game, and no need to relitigate that for however many time that it is. So it was an off weekend. It is what it is, but we are ready to go the rest of the way. Plans are that this week we are going to do pretty deep dive on the offensive side of the ball for Georgia State. Next pod, we are going to do the defense, and then look at that, before you know it, it's going to be a game week, and we're going to be talking about the NCAA game at that point, looking forward. So we will get to that as the main thrust of this podcast, but there was one bit of news that dropped just today as we are getting ready to record this podcast that is not football related. It is about basketball, and it is kind of one of those, like, when is this going to happen moments. Tulane is on the schedule. Georgia State will be playing Tulane in men's basketball at the Fort Myers tip-off in the Palms Division for an MTE in November. The game will be Monday, November 23rd, I believe, 4:30. It's probably a little bit of a let-off for not just fans listening to this, but also just me. This first game is not a return to what you could charitably say is the convocation center that Ron Hunter built because of the job that he did restoring the program, building it for the first time, however you want to describe it. So a bit of a let-off in that regard, but certainly that's a possibility down the line. And I think it's going to be a fun one just on the current present-day Georgia State. It will be an interesting benchmark because it's been a team that's been sniffing 20 wins in the American the last few years. So it's like if they're going toe-to-toe with them in November, could be an indication of where they're going. But it is an event for Georgia State men's basketball and kind of, you know, I won't say years in the making because I don't know if we ever knew when this was going to happen exactly, but I think this was something that was in people's minds of like, all right, now that Ron Hunter is gone, when is that day going to come when they are going to play again, and what's that going to be like? And so we'll find out in the not too distant future, just November.
Yeah, I mean, I love these like tournaments. You know, the crazier they are, in my opinion, the better they are. Like, I wish these two schools have like found a way to line up sooner. But if this is how it has to happen, that's totally fine. I've got no beef with that. And the other thing too is like, as you mentioned, like Tulane, at least from a basketball perspective, they're very close to where Georgia State, I should say, used to be, are trying to get back to. I can't believe I'm still saying that. It's only been 4 years, but
yeah, I mean, he has not gotten to the point where they were like, we're with Georgia State, like top 100 Ken Palm, like really flirting for the tournament, other than if they'd won their conference tournament, but respectable. And I think he took over a team that won 3 games, so it wasn't a given that this is just like add water and they'll be fine. So you're seeing Ron Hunter do some of the things he's been doing. I just want to point out, I've pulled up for people watching on YouTube, the hashtag is hashtag own the fort. It's who will hashtag own the fort. It's 2 divisions. There's the Power Conference division. Georgia State's obviously in the Palms division, which is the non-power leagues. They will play Tulane. They'll also play Florida Gulf Coast. So Charlotte was in there. They played them before. Northern Iowa even is a fun mid-major team. That would have been cool to play them, but obviously the Ron Hunter of it all makes Tulane a cool thing. But own the fort, hashtag.
I like it. You know, I didn't know that there was a fort in. Oh, geez. We're not cutting that, but yeah. I totally whiffed on that. So good on them. It was clever.
I don't know Fort Myers as much, but it's in the ballpark of Naples, Florida, which is where I went quite a bit as a kid. Is where Our family beach vacations always were, so that's fun. I certainly have started the process of, am I doing this? Can I do this? Can I go to this? Because even just for the Tulane game, it would be cool. But also, I don't know, the beach sounds good. I mean, you're in Chicago, so snow happens there regularly and like cold weather. It's like regularly been in the 90s here in Georgia the last couple of weeks, so I don't know if I'm actually all that this isn't the time where I'm pining for the beach, but maybe by November it would be nice to be in that type of weather again.
Honestly, maybe I'm just weird.
Who
Totally
am I talking
fair.
to? You just were literally in Alaska, so
Also true.
Chicago's like an oasis compared to where you just were.
I was actually laughing at people on the trip because I could definitely tell who was from a cold weather city and who was not. There was a woman who was like almost totally wrapped up for a large part of the first total sea day, and I was like, "You clearly are from like Florida," which is fine.
We're in the dining room. Come on.
Exactly. But speaking of Florida, I think if this is how like a typical November goes, like this will be a really good break and a really good test for the basketball team, and I know we'll talk about them like later on as we get more and more into closer to the season, but it's nice to feel like they are heading towards a fresh start. And maybe this is cope, maybe this is, I'm feeling good after a vacation, but I really do feel like a tournament like this, specifically where it is, because Georgia State has played in some of these tournaments and they just like have not been, I'm not saying destinations, but they've just been
feels like
the
most esteemed. They're like
exactly
to that point.
Exactly.
Some of those ones they do that are like, they play a game at Mississippi or whoever that isn't really part of the MTE, but it's like the pre-MTE. Discounting those, I don't think they've done one of these that has had a power conference component on top of it. They went to Jacksonville a couple years ago. They went to Cancun this last year. And it was maybe that one had a power conference one that I'm not remembering, but like it wasn't like advertised with these big names. And even like just the Florida Gulf Coast isn't the dunk city of old, but them and Charlotte has been a decent mid-major program. I feel like right when I was following sports, the basketball was going for them in like the mid 2000s, and like I mentioned, UNI, it feels like a step up from what they've been in. With no disrespect, I mean clearly they were the ones dragging it down last year because they go to Cancun and lose all their games against everyone. But this does feel like they might not be there to attend the Georgia State Tulane game, but the possibility that these games are going to be more attended than some of the other ones they've been in previous years. And I don't know. I think the sell is probably, from the tournament's point of view, they're hoping that people are traveling with their team and making a thing of it because it's Thanksgiving week. I feel like that's certainly less of a thing in early season basketball than what you're hoping for with football. And you're also probably going up against, football season will still be going on and there'll be games that week that people are probably planning for. So curious on the execution of that, but some of the images from past tournaments, pretty good attendance. So to your point, this feels like kind of the crowd you want to be hanging out in. And they're playing at Pitt, who's funny enough in the other port, the beach division of this. But they'll play them in, I think, December 18. We did get the full conference schedule for both men's and women's basketball. But honestly, I feel like when we do the schedule, we always do it in two parts. And we'll do the conference one, and then we'll also circle back when all of the non-con is known. And we're a podcast just like a football team across America, trying to get better, trying to get more efficient. Just do it all in one go when we have the full schedule and talk about it, which probably is not that far away. I think something like a third of the teams in D1 have officially announced their schedule, and with the events like this starting to be put out there, feels like we're not far from basically everyone's being available. And so that, along with a reset of where the roster's at, hopefully getting some stuff from the coaches themselves as they are building these programs, is certainly on the docket. As it'd be no surprise to say, if we were taking a poll of Georgia State fans right now, I would expect there is more excitement about basketball than there is about football, which maybe we're going to make you feel better about. Maybe it's going to change nothing at all as we get into the offense preview, the deep dive for this fall. But I just suspect it's really not going to take that much for this team. If they are good early, if they get a nice win, if they beat Tulane, if they win both of these games, get whatever it is, if they are competitive with Pitt and the non-con, whoever else they've got on the schedule, if they beat the MAC team on opening night, it really won't take that much for, I think, people to be excited again about Georgia State basketball. And it really was just a sense of like, how it hadn't been going well under Jonas Hayes, and it's not like you're really going to have to do that much to get people to buy back in, because it wasn't that long ago that we were chalking Georgia State up for like a top 4 finish in the Sun Belt every year. And I think people are ready for that to be the reality rather than kind of refusing to think that that is a possibility ever again.
This is totally, pie in the sky. I'm not making any declarations, but if there's like one, 4-year collegiate cycle where Georgia State kind of goes down in the dumps, but then returns to, where they used to be, hey man, that's the game sometimes, just chalk it up to that and, we move forward from here.
It literally, at this level, is if you do not get your hires right, it's just going to set you back and there's no escaping it. And you can't, programs at this level are not outspending that type of just organization and all the rest of it. And Georgia State's had a rough period. Football, really pivotal year as we've started to go into, and we will keep previewing as we are getting closer to the season. I don't want to say this like, as there is like the expectation this is going to be like the top offense in the country. As you look at Georgia State's offense, as we get into today's main topic, I think that this is the first time under Del McGee there's been maybe fair big expectations for a unit. We didn't really know much either side year one, and even with Ted Hurst and kind of his arrival last year, I don't think we went into the year like it was like, how are they going to use Ted? It's going to be interesting. Obviously, there's still some hopes they'd run the ball well. When you bring back a quarterback that you like in Cameron Brown, you bring back the offensive coordinator, Hugh Jackson, that is currency in this day and age of college football, to the point of what we were just talking about, of like, sometimes the thing that messes the team up is they lose their good coordinator, they lose their quarterback, and they can't replace them. It is not a guarantee of success for Georgia State in 2026, but that is a better starting point than a lot of people were at when they started camp a couple of weeks ago. Just they knew who their quarterback was going to be, and you hope it was an advantage for them that they've been able to use this entire offseason knowing this is the guy we're building around, this is the offense we want to run with this guy. I don't think it's unfair to say that they were 21 points a game, 21.2 points a game last year. They should be meaningfully better production-wise as an offense. And I don't know what that looks like in terms of wins-loss, but if we get to December, we're talking about an offense that doesn't look all that much different. It will be a failure of this coaching staff to take advantage of what, at this point, is kind of the one bright spot you can point to after a one-win season.
And that, that's the challenge, because like you mentioned, going into 2024, we had some excitement about Christian Veilleux, but we didn't know what he was going to be, and then last year, they obviously had Veilleux and still, didn't really know what Cam Brown was right before camp. TJ Finley, transfers, is the starter, isn't the starter, wait, he's not playing, wait, he's not enrolled. It gets to September, October, we still don't really know. But you're right. Like, this year is the first year that we really know. And the name of the game last year was inconsistency on offense. And it's hard because the same level of inconsistency could absolutely happen again if some of the late season Cam Brown, injury, like nagging injuries pop up. But at the same time, though, we can't predict that from right now. And I'm not too worried about his injury history in that sense. But it is nice to go into the season just knowing, okay, this is somebody who's going to be our starting quarterback, hell, high water, whatever. For right now, we're running our offense through what he can do. And I mean, you saw it last year. And I think that's the difference between 2026 and 2024. We didn't really know what Christian Veilleux was going to do jumping down from Pitt. But, like, we've seen Cam Brown be good. Did it lead to wins last year? No. But we've seen him be good at Georgia State, with Georgia State's coaches, with Georgia State's weapons, in that environment, using those facilities, obviously. So you've got another offseason. You've got just general, maybe he's a little bit smarter this year and is a little bit more healthy, protects himself a little bit better. You've got some of the improvements, on the other parts of the offense that we'll talk about. So there is definitely some optimism, and I think you can at least feel good about the quarterback room for now, just because we've actually seen this guy play and play well. I think last year when he was finally given the opportunity, I'm going to say he played at a high level, even if the stats don't necessarily bear out it being the highest level. I'm not saying that this is going to be a G5 Heisman candidate or anything like that, but, I think you could project Georgia State to have a very solid starting quarterback right now.
Yeah, and as I pull up the stats, correct the record, it was 19.7, 19.8 points a game last year as an offense. So even worse than I originally said, which a glass half full would say more room for improvement, but still kind of the same point of you should be at worst approaching like the 25 to 27 range. And really, if you're trying to get to a bowl game, you want to be north of that, especially with the questions that linger with the defense. Part 2 next week. Cameron Brown, it was 1,296 yards, 13 touchdowns, 1 interception. It was 65% completion percentage, and it was in 10 games. It averaged out to about 129 passing yards a game. But that's on an average with, you were doing the kind of the QB rotation. It wasn't a full, like, he played all 10 games. It's kind of weird to say this as we are bumping up kind of the optimism, thinking that this is the reason you're excited about the offense if you think it's going to be better. I feel like it's not just like you're going to duplicate his stats of like, oh, he was 13-1 last year, so this year he's going to be 22 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 900 rushing yards. Obviously, if he does all of that, it would say a lot of good things for the offense. He's going to play more. He's going to have more opportunities where it works both ways, where what he showed on tape last year, he's going to have to be ready to show a different thing based on how defense are playing him differently. Certainly, you mentioned keeping himself healthy. Teams know he's going to want to take off, that they're going to use him in the design run game, so both he and Coach Jackson are going to have to be ready for that inevitability and kind of the chess match there. But I don't think it's just as simple as he will be exactly the same guy. Like, there might be lumps here or there, but I think you're starting from a place of you're building the offense around the guy. You know what he does well. You've had the offseason to build towards that. And kind of building on top of that, you bring in Aiden Pereira from Merrimack, who feels like a solid backup quarterback. He was even more used in the run game at Merrimack than Cam Brown was here at Georgia State. He profiles a lot of the same way, and so it's not going to be the same thing. As I know I've talked about it in some other podcasts talking about Georgia State, I think we've mentioned on this one, like, you're not going to have like the issue last year with, is it Cam's team? Is it TJ's offense? Is it, how are you using these guys at the same time? Like, if you're going to need to use both of them, if there's a chance that, Cam does have one of those games where he has to go out, Aiden will run largely a lot of the same things, and we saw some of that in the spring game. So it bears repeating just because that hasn't been the case. Christian Veyer and Zach Gibson, they weren't nearly as divergent maybe as Cam and TJ were, but they were not also kind of the same prototype of QB. So it's the first year where it feels like they've gotten that mix right, where kind of no matter what, everyone is doing the same thing, similar skill sets that will shine in the same type of offense, which is a good starting point that now you got to go take advantage of. And so that's kind of where it's, at least where it starts. I think where it ends, we'll get to at the last position, we'll get to down at the end in the trenches. But the other part of it is, I don't think skill position talent has been the issue in any of the years. I think they've had good players, and this year it's basically an entire line change at running back. And it's going to be a committee until we know otherwise, because that's just the way Del McGee runs it. I am not even pretending to project I know like who's going to get the share of the carries, if anyone's going to emerge. Just because it has been, Jordan Simmons eventually kind of took it over by the end of last season. But even then, you're still working in Branson Robinson. You were still working in DJ Murray. And so I'm done trying to pretend it's like we know how this is going to work. Everyone's probably going to get near enough a fair shot, and from there it's going to be who starts making the most of their carries.
Yeah, running back is so tough. Just in general, it's tough because a lot of guys do different things, and sometimes you've got guys who are listed as running backs, but like they're just third down backs, passing, backs, depending on what that looks like. And obviously you run more in college, just running backs and with quarterbacks, so it's really hard to kind of guess based on a list of names, and I think last year it was Simmons who transferred in from, Power 5 school, I believe.
And it had been in Akron before, so he kind of was like both at the same time.
Exactly. And like that one we could kind of tell, like, okay, based on everything that they were saying, it seemed like we were going into camp with like, okay, this guy's, if he's not literally RB1, he's,
Well,
forcing his
I will
way.
push back on that and say, as we get into who's in the room, I think they need to find that guy quicker. You know, they kind of settled on Freddie Brock pretty quickly. Although, like I said, everyone still worked in 2024. It was really, like, I remember being the South Alabama game last year, that they really just started giving Simmons the ball more. And then he was kind of the guy from there. But before that, it was pretty, no one really got all that much of an opportunity to establish themselves. And they got to find it quicker when they decide on who the guy is this year, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and that's where I was going with that. Like Simmons, I believe the Ole Miss game, like, you know, whatever, started, and then after that they were just like, okay, we're gonna give literally everybody else a touch, because I think there was some fumble issues, there was some, you know, the performance wasn't great either, and then we just kind of towed around with Brock for a while, and then
Rashad Amos, Branson Robinson,
you know,
DJ Murray was in there, and it was
bad.
I think that's kind of the biggest, if you want to say disappointment, I think, other than the team is 4-20. It's not as simple as Del McGee's a running backs coach, ergo the running game is going to be good, but we had gotten used to, aside from anything else, under Sean Elliott, that this team was able to effectively run the ball and had that identity, and they just haven't been able to establish that. As I've got the stats on screen still, 9 rushing touchdowns in a year, just a hair over 4 yards a carry, 124 rushing yards a game. Like, that's not that identity. And so I think especially in moments, they were able to tap into it, especially when Cameron Brown started being more of a feature in the run game, and you're able to just dial up design runs for him as well as what you had the running backs. But that's been the missing piece. You know, like that is, you had Ted Hurst, you had a quarterback that, when you settled on him, he's only throwing 1 interception. Like, it wasn't the passing game was totally ineffective. The running game wasn't good enough, and you're sitting at 39-40% on third down conversions. I'd also chalk that up to not being able to run the ball. You're behind the sticks a little too much. And so it's kind of like, this is what's got to start clicking in 2026 for the team. And there's kind of, again, a hodgepodge. It's a mix, although less in the bringing in power conference guys and more in bringing in lower level production. So Lanier McCrary from Shorter, Savion Hart from Georgetown. Pulling up their stats here real quick just so I can trying to not just kind of spout names and give some kind of context for like the yardages they had. Jalen Poe as well from Northern Illinois. Hart was, I think, freshman of the year or something. Like, he was at Georgetown, had some effective numbers. I thought I had the numbers in front of me, but I do not. But productive at the FCS level. Lanier McCrary was productive at the D2 level for Shorter. Kind of think that they've got a chance to kind of be your early leaders in the clubhouse. But then you've got some upside too with Xavier Butler, who's a freshman, and Quantavious Wiggins, who's also a freshman. Touted recruits, you've got the upside. And then LaDainian Martin is a sophomore or second-year player, and DJ Murray is back. And I guess the other thing with this is, and this we haven't really dug into this that deeply, you've got the new kind of guidance from the NCAA that it's going to be 5 for 5. Redshirt's going to be a thing of the past. You're just going to have 5 years of eligibility. Those 5 seasons you can play. I'm curious, like, what that changes as far as the decision to just put a freshman out there when you think he might be ready, and given that there's going to be no more thought process towards, are we going to burn the red shirt for a year where they carry it like 20 times or whatever? Like, that's gone. And so this is a position group specifically, I wonder where you start to see that, because even in the old world, freshman was a place where you'd see running back was a place where you'd see freshmen play pretty early, and especially now with that kind of guardrail further taken away, I'm curious if a guy just starts showing flashes in camp, one of these freshmen emerges, how quickly we start to see them.
It's a good point, and I think it's tough as a, you know, ostensibly we are a college football podcast, like that is what we are. Sorry, we are a college sports podcast. Excuse me, I said sports, not football. I meant to say sports, not football. It's tough because, I mean, even now I saw something today that there are NFL, like, you know, players in the NFL like camp that are trying to release their So it's tough to really know, because like I agree with you. If we are in a perfect world, I do think that running back is where kind of the G5 can kind of fight back, if you will. And, you can have guys who say, hey, I'm going to transfer down. Shoot, man, I'm not really doing anything because there's this 18-year-old who just got off of high school who, barely has college textbooks, if anything. And, he can run fast as lightning and just makes all the reads that he needs to make from behind the line. And, is just a guy who puts his head down and, he can get you those tough 1-2 yard runs, that Georgia State has been missing the last couple of years. And I'm not saying specifically that will happen here, but until there's like an official
run ball.
Right, exactly. I'm not saying there's until we like are officially codified in this rule. I don't think it's a bad rule. I haven't necessarily given it too much thought, but I do think it will help, somebody like a Georgia State if it stays, because you could have a guy like Martin play now and just be good. You don't have to worry about, okay, he's running a little too much. He's playing a little too much today. Don't want to, have him play next week or whatever. Like, you can just go and put your best 11 on the field at any given time.
Yeah, and like I say, the other area, I mean, we'll get to receiver, although there aren't that many freshmen or, I guess first-year players is the new parlance we're going with. Special teams as well, I'm curious, especially because that's been a sore spot for Georgia State, and it's like sometimes freshmen are not up to the speed as far as their assignments, and sometimes it can be a problem if you're playing young guys on that unit. But, if they're out there, if that's where they're able to get on the field because maybe there's a guy in front of them in a starting position, you certainly don't have to worry about it being a wasted year playing them on special teams either. And so maybe that's a leveler for Georgia State as well, who have struggled on that unit as well. We'll just kind of sprinkle in special team stuff throughout. I don't think we need to do nearly as much of a dive on those units as the offense and the defense, but just going to sprinkle notes on those through these 2 episodes. And that is kind of along the same lines. And yeah, it's a mess as far as the people trying to get eligibility back who have been in NFL camps. And obviously the NCAA is trying to kind of blanket ineligible everyone, and they keep losing court cases, and judges keep saying, no, they're eligible. And there was a new tranche of that today where some players on a Louisiana suit are now eligible, that some of whom were not drafted, but were going through NFL camps not that long ago. But kind of hope that none of that's on the mindset affecting Georgia State, because literally last year, introducing a quarterback too late into the process messed things up. So I kind of hope that that's the last thing from Georgia State football's mind right now, is they're in the middle of camp and they can focus on the guys that are here. But the 5-for-5 thing, I think, makes a lot of sense. We'll see it in practice for the first time. And, if a guy is going to leave no matter what the first time, he's good, but he can give you some good, like if Xavier Butler flashes this year, 500 yards, whatever it is, and that means that a power conference team's going to notice him. Well, this is kind of the year that Dell needs a guy like that to emerge and have that success, and you deal with the consequences of that later. You'd almost rather have them be here 1 or 2 years and have a productive season than lose them either way, but don't ever get to see that pan out in any way, shape, or form. So curious to see the immediate effect of that new eligibility decision and how that plays out with Georgia State. But like I say, not making any bets. I was asked about like who I thought would be like the snap one starting running back for Georgia State, and I tried to hedge really hard because I was like, I'm not going to get on a limb on this because I don't think that there is. I don't think it is governed like that, and I think that's fine. I think starting out, giving guys opportunities, going with the committee because it's a long season, all makes sense. Just the one thing is, like, if someone has that, like, 90-yard game, 100-yard game, hits a 75-yard touchdown, I think you got to start shading them the ball a little bit more than some of the other guys and just start to let them get a rhythm, and really just the offense has got to have a ground game, or I just don't know how much, even as we are projecting a lot from Cameron Brown, I just think if that part of it can't get going, then all the rest of this might be for naught.
To be fair, we are also projecting him to be running, and that's
that
the
is
thing.
True.
that is also going to unlock the offense.
Yes, this is true. And yeah, I was doing one of these, and it sounded counterintuitive to them when I was saying, like, that the run game being better, like, they needed it to be better last year when they had Ted Hurst, who is now a third-round NFL draft pick. And it would have made the offense better for him as well if they were not just being able to get away with not packing the box against Georgia State, and it would have been more favorable for the passing game. And it's why also, as we transition to the pass catchers, and I will group them together for a specific reason, just wide receivers and tight ends, it's almost like it is great for Ted Hurst that he is having his moment in the NFL, and he did great things for Georgia State. And I don't want it to seem like it's, oh, move on and next man up, all the rest of it, because you are losing one of the better receivers you've ever had. But there are a lot of guys that can get reps, and it doesn't feel to me like there's any world in which Georgia State 2026 football will be a failure because they lost Ted Hurst to the NFL. Like, it feels like there's the opportunity for the pass game to at least level off where it is with other guys stepping up, and it really is about being a more balanced offense anyway. The balanced offense would have made his offenses better, and it is what Georgia State needs for a better offense in 2026. But the reason I group these together is Grant Hollier, who feels like the chance to be kind of the helium guy of this offense other than Cameron Brown. Listed as a tight end. I think that's probably what he'll play most of the time, but they were using him in the spring as like a slot receiver, like lining up as a receiver. He offers, I think, that flexibility. I'm curious to see, now that we're into just mere weeks away from the game, exactly what his usage is, and I think that he could be the guy that kind of emerges. There was already a lot of excitement about him last year, and I think you saw that. And he was a guy that before this 5-for-5 was even a thing, was playing pretty regularly from the early part of the season and was stepping up, was kind of the guy other than Ted Hurst who you saw have some really nice big explosive plays in the pass game.
And, as far as, like, everybody catching passes, I don't think there's anybody else on the roster right now who you could look and say, okay, yeah, that's a guy who Brown should be going to on third down. That's a guy who, whenever you need a catch, like, this is somebody who you should be looking for. Which isn't a bad thing. I think that in the same way that the running backs are a little, it's a little bit hard to project, I think right now the wide receivers are in a similar way. So when you have a Grant Hollier that's coming back for their second season, I think you can actually feel good about, kind of what little he did last year. And there's a good bit of projection that you can have with him.
Yeah, like you say, it's not like it's like the guys aren't there, just we don't know who is going to emerge. And so you look at him, Matt Baran, who they brought in from Fordham, feels like a nice like safety blanket as far as tight end goes, that like if you are going to find different ways to line up Grant, or if you were going to have like two tight end sets, whatever, and you won't, even, Del McGee himself said like the thing that Grant needed to work on last year was still kind of getting up to speed in the blocking game. Just, he was a true freshman going up against guys that are, in a lot of cases 3-4 years older than him. And in the trenches, it's tough work, and tight ends, they got to do so much. I mean, they got to do like, besides like the quarterback are doing like the most on offense as far as like assignments, you're running, you're run blocking, you're going out in the pattern, you're doing both, you're disguising what you're doing. Like, there's a lot that's asked of you, and that's almost why I look at him as a pass catcher first, and you hope he continues to develop the rest later. See what he does this year in that facet as well. But you have Baran coming in. You also have Avion McBride and Wes Campbell, who were here last year. That tight end is weirdly a pretty deep room for this. And it's like four guys, but it's like you have everything you need, and just that, and they kind of complement, I think, the upside of Hollier pretty well. So I'm actually pretty excited about that. And the days of having like the wheel route, the tight end, just down the seam tight end, it just brings me back to early days of the podcast, just heralding the triumphs of Aubrey Payne and Roger Carter, who just, when you look back on it, just like really just did their dang job, man.
And Georgia State has not been able to run good two tight end sets in a couple of years. It's not just the tight ends, to not to completely dump on them. You really need to make sure that your, one, receivers have to be doing their job too. Number two, your blocking also has to be better on the interior, and that's just not something that Georgia State has been really good at the last couple of years. But this tight end room does seem like it'll be a little bit better. There's a little bit more experience going into this upcoming season than either of the last two, which is good, because I think yes, there's the nostalgia from our early, the early years of the pod, but just also there's just something really aesthetically pleasing when you've got a running quarterback who can buy some time, and then you've got that tight end that just kind of snuck behind that second level. Georgia State with Granger, They were so good at that. They were so good with Dan Ellington and just finding somebody who had just like kind of slipped and went on the, not necessarily a bootleg or anything like that, but just ended up being on the same scramble side as, the mobile quarterback, and just where the pocket kind of broke down. And oh, there you go. There's a nice, easy 8-yard out right there. Aubrey's right there. Rogers right there. So Georgia State needs to get back to being able to do that, because it also helps, like, I don't want to just rag on 2025 in this, but a lot of where their offense broke down was we talk about this idea of complementary football from a, offense, defense, special team side. They didn't really play complementary football just from a down to down, personnel situation either. They just kind of couldn't do more than one thing on offense for a variety of reasons. So I do think this year, for now, it looks like it could be better.
Yeah, this is with zero research done on the matter. Just you brought it up, it like light bulb went off in my head. I just feel like they haven't attacked the middle of the field as well, as much as like in the passing game. It was a lot of stuff on the perimeter, and there would be times where they'd line Ted Hurst up in the slot. They'd throw some screens to him, and they try to work it. But I just feel like that is maybe what's been missing. Whereas you had a good with regularity with the tight ends we were talking about under the Sean Elliott offenses. Like it wasn't fully like triple option where it's like you were never passing the ball. Like those teams were passing a good bit as well, but it was like you would catch them by surprise going over the middle of the field because you were running the ball so effectively. And so it all feeds in together that I feel like this is the greatest opportunity since those teams, because kind of the top line talent there. We didn't see Roger Carter maybe emerge quite as dramatically as I think Grant Hollier had like a 50-yard catch. But as a freshman, he played. And he started to play more and more. And then when he was a sophomore, you started to see it again. And he was a really productive player for 4 years for Georgia State. I mean, Aubrey came in as a transfer, so you didn't really see that journey. And he was immediately like getting a touchdown every other catch in every other game in his first year in 2019. But like, it feels like you're grabbing it a little bit early with Grant Hollier. And you saw it some. Certainly, you can tell that the coaches were excited. Dell was excited about what he had there last year a couple of times when he was asked a question about him. And so that's where I start with the pass catchers, because I think that is, right now, feels like the guy that is the riser. But they brought in a lot of good 3-star receivers in the first class that are now, they're in their third year in the program. Kyle Washington, DJ Avery. You've also got DJ Riles, who wasn't a quarterback that long ago, but has made a full development to being just a slot receiver. Shouldn't give him short shrift. Feels like he could be just a nice security blanket over the middle as well for Cameron Brown at quarterback.
If I'm remembering correctly, wasn't his big thing like, I'm just fast, but like my arm is not doing enough of what we need out of a quarterback? Like that makes a lot of sense that he has been moved there.
Well, and I don't have the data here, but I don't think he ever did receive. I think he was quarterback through and through, and then made the switch. And so it's like, you could expect it to take a couple of years to fully click, but he was a guy who's been on the field the last 2 years. The receiver room and the experience in the receiver room was not what it was when Dell arrived. There was a lot of guys playing their first significant minutes, and it was not as deep a room, so he was kind of forced into it, especially there weren't that many slot guys, but it's in a deeper room, but he has emerged, and he's one of the leaders, I think, of that deeper room. Right now you look at, if you're trying to say, who do you think is going to be a part of the offense on the outside, the perimeter, in the slot, however, as a receiver, he's the one you'd feel, I think, best about, just because he has been in this offense the last 2 years, and you're hoping for another step from him. But Washington and Avery, all those guys in that are now, I guess, third-year guys, some of them also second-year receivers, certainly been targeted. The question is, like, the development on the individual level there, and also just what does it look like now that Ted Hurst isn't a part of it? Like, what does that mean as far as how they change the roles for guys? That role is open. Does that mean another guy who emerges in that role means it opens up the other X, Y, Z, all these receiver terminologies? Like, who is settling into those roles? And we can't credit Damian Craig enough and Del McGee for the development and the identification they did with Ted Hurst and churning out a third-round NFL draft pick at wide receiver at Georgia State, which certainly is a perception-changing type of thing for this program. And now you've got some other heralded recruits that you can kind of sell them like reps are up for grabs. Let's see what you can do. So I'm curious who emerges from that. Owen Dupree comes in from West Georgia. He was one of the guys in the spring game that he was a newcomer, he was a new face, and he was making catches. So curious if he is able to emerge as well. But they brought in a couple of guys that are like the Ted 2.0 kind of model. Jalen Marshall comes in from Shorter last year and didn't really have that much of an impact, but the same thing applies to him as far as reps are up for grabs. You could certainly see it happen now. Rajon Dorsey comes in from Erskine, productive, I think D1 or D2, is D3. And then going through the Chase Allen Jackman is another guy who's for Washburn. Those are more like big body, like 6'1" receiver, 6'5" receiver in Dorsey's case that from the lower level were productive. Those are the guys that we couldn't know were going to emerge yet, kind of in the same way we couldn't have known in early August 2024 just what Ted Hurst was going to be. So I'm curious to see, like I said, there's a lot of options there, including some names that are pretty familiar. And if the kind of recruiting successes that have been heralded about Del McGee are going to start hitting, it's along with the running backs I was talking about earlier, this feels like the year where you could really start to see that happen or not. And that could be a determining factor in how successful this whole project ends up being and how successful 2026 ends up being for Georgia State. Is you start to see some of these guys that are high 3-star recruits play like that on the field now that they have the opportunity, and there is a lot of equity in the room without there being just the clear number one guy at this point.
It should help them, honestly. I mean, so much up for grabs. Like, I know the whole, we're going to recreate in the aggregate is so overplayed amongst sports fans, but, that is legitimately the truth. Yeah.
You would love it if someone, it just becomes clear. It's like, oh, this is the guy who's going to be the favorite target of Cameron Brown. And that's the other factor of it. It is who does Cam have good chemistry with going through fall camp, and who does he like throwing what routes to? That's certainly a part of it. But it's... You're not necessarily trying to moneyball it, but you might be trying to moneyball it at least for a little bit. And I think they've got options. They've got guys that fit different roles, and it's kind of up to the play calling, the offensive design, and the quarterback play. And the next thing we'll get to with the offensive line and the run game that will determine how successful it is. But this shouldn't be a thing where it's like you don't have enough good receivers. Like, they've recruited it across all of these classes. They brought in transfers. Like, they've got a lot of options there. And we've seen flashes from a few of them, and some of them we haven't seen flashes because they haven't been here or they haven't been on the field all that much. But there's reasons to believe that could happen. It's just this is the year where you're really going to need to see it. And it's just going to be interesting to watch. I don't have a real takeaway on who I think it's going to be. It's just I think we'll start to see it in the early weeks. It's okay, that's the guy who's taking the leap.
And I know that sucks to hear, great podcasting, right? But also, they won one game last year. That's kind of the point, This is, unfortunately, the type of team where we have to have this conversation. Before we get to the offensive line, just because I think that they won't be tested in a way that we can see like everybody else, does the committee aspect of the running back room and the wide receiver room give you pause about week one necessarily? And obviously we have no idea what's been going on, in camp. We don't know if somebody has
pause
emerged.
In the sense of like
just concerned that the offense is not actually going to take a step forward this year. Not that they will be as bad as last year.
Yeah, the committee part doesn't really... I think you really would like someone at receiver to emerge. Because I do think it was the thing that if the running game had been there, it would have been a real problem for other defenses that you had to always circle number one last year with Ted Hurst. That was certainly a big positive for Georgia State. But running back, it doesn't concern me because committee is just the way it is now. You want to keep guys fresh. It's a long season. As we transition to the offensive line, this is where you really... we're recording this podcast on August 19. I kind of think you hope you already know who at least your 6 or 7 guys you're going to want to go to on the offensive line are. And there were some injuries last year. They didn't have their 5 that they started the year with stay there for 12 games, and that was a factor. But it's been 2 years. There's now going to be a third offensive line coach. They've tried bringing a lot of different guys from the portal both years to middling success overall, as you're talking about assembling a consistent offensive line. I kind of think already if that is the place where they are not sure or guys aren't emerging, that is what would give me pause.
Actually, that makes sense.
So, it's like I don't really know how to prejudge it because they clearly prioritized. They brought in a lot of guys who had been in power conference programs, that power conference size. You know, your Connor Jones from Michigan, Marcus Maskell from Florida, Dalen Hazard from Iowa State, Gage Stanlin, the immaculately offensive line named from Oklahoma State, all over the rest of the roster. It was guys from lower levels who had put up big production. And here's a lot of guys that were in big programs that didn't play very much, if at all. That felt very significant and very telling of the strategy. But at the same time, you have Tyler Williams, who they brought in from last year from Akron, who is back, who's played center a good bit of last year. They have Donovan Funch, who is now a third-year player. He's a walk-on, I think, initially. Played as a freshman, played last year. Kind of, I guess, one of the incumbent starters, if you want to call it that. He played a lot of left guard. DeAndre Duffus comes in from Maryland last year, is still around. Like, they have, if it is not like a whole brand new five, it wouldn't like be a total blaring red alarm for me, because it's like there were guys that came back that you don't want to forget that continuity and like having guys be multi-year starters is a positive thing. It certainly was a hallmark of the good running game Sean Elliott's offense has had, is that they brought guys like Pat Bartlett and Malik Sumter all the way through the ranks and had them play multiple years. So it's like I almost don't know how to prejudge it, because it's like if it wasn't made up of the bulk of the guys they brought in to start from these power conference programs, that almost would feel like it's a problem. But I'm open-minded. It's just kind of like you need to see the same five, injuries aside. Like if you keep healthy, the same five start through the entirety of non-con. And so I really don't know how to handicap the race. I feel like you at least start off giving the guys who are in the positions the chance to keep their jobs, and so it wouldn't surprise me. But if it's like you're seeing a lot of tinkering, if you're seeing like some of the cross-training go on where it's like, all right, we're going to play this guy at each of the guard positions week to week, and you still can't settle on your five, it wouldn't surprise me if the offense hasn't kind of gelled and that you're not seeing the leap that we were talking about needing. So for me, it's not about the Jimmies and Joes. Like guys I think can emerge from either the returning mix or from the transfer they brought in, or, you know, Maxwell Robinson's like a high 3-star, 4-star type recruit. He's a freshman who I think originally was committed to Kansas State, who signs with you. Like freshmen playing on the offensive line is pretty rare, but you've got pedigree there in a way that makes you think maybe it's possible. But it really almost doesn't matter who, for the fan perspective. It's just like, is it the same guys? Does it feel like they have settled on a starting five they can trust? And are they, frankly, just doing the job, moving bodies and getting the run game going? Because that's going to be what is determining whether this is more of the same on offense or if they can really take that step with Cameron Brown kind of running the offense that they've designed for him over the past few months.
And, you know, with all I think that's the only reason why I could say that maybe the only person who I would probably put in pencil right now is Funch, if that's how you pronounce it, the tackle, just because he played so much there last year. Yeah, you know, and
also
I think
Maxwell Robinson, I should say. Xavier Robinson was the linebacker they brought in last year.
No, that makes
Robinson
sense.
Is the offensive lineman.
I think I heard
transfers.
I think I heard Maxwell, but like recognize that it sounded weird. But no, that makes sense.
Maybe I just wrote down Xavier and I said Maxwell. And I'm correcting nothing, and I was right the first time. But
it happens.
On my notes, I written down Xavier. I was like, wait, hold on.
Different
happens. Transfer or different player for Georgia State.
But that's the thing. Like we have not seen this offensive line be guys that they could lean on, you know, in a couple of years. Even Coach Elliott's last year, like they were. I think it was like halfway through where you were kind of looking up as like they've been like really bad in, you know, on 1 and 2 yard runs, and then as they ended the season, they were like it got worse and worse with the injuries, and you know the last couple of years the line has been not just a revolving door in the sense that guys can get behind them. It's just we just don't know who's going to be there because it's been so hurt. The play has been bad, and this has to be the first year of some continuity under McGee. Like it's either they're not going to be and he's not going to be here next year, or they are and we can talk about it depending on how the rest of it goes.
And should also say this. Everyone is dealing with this problem. Every single one of the podcasts like us talking about G5, Power Conference, whoever it is. Nobody knows who their offensive line is. They brought in a whole bunch of guys. It's going to be a hodgepodge. Like, this is a problem. This is like the biggest area where the portal and just the constant churn of rosters is really showing itself. But there are going to be more than a handful of programs that get it right and have a group that gels. And Georgia State just got to find a way to be one of those and not have the same thing that happened the last couple of years where it just never really came together. So it's like speaking into a microphone, really easy to say. It's like, oh, the offensive line has to be good. Like, recognize that it is incredibly difficult. This is, like, if we did the Moneyball thing, it's incredibly hard. Like, building an offensive line in the old days was hard, and it's even harder now with just the way it is just so difficult in identifying, especially when guys haven't played that much. Just, I do not envy the job of offensive line coaches and offensive staffs across the country. Not to mention, you just can't replicate games in the trenches.
And that
you can't do games in practice, no matter how hard you practice. All the rest of it, you just can't know until games really happen that you can really tell what you've got.
And that's the hard part. Like, yeah, you might be, going hard in practice. There might be some scrums, but like, there is a difference between I literally cannot let you touch my QB and he's got the red non-contact on. If you touch him, coach is going to make you go run 10 miles or whatever your punishment is. So, yeah, I'm going to try hard, but I don't have to try as hard as I would when it's, 3rd and 10 and I need this to, get into the end zone or something. So
the last thing I will say about the offense, which I think we've covered, like, there's reason for optimism. And like I say, at this point, it's the side of the ball I feel will be the leader of this team. Just because there's a lot of unknown with the defense, and it has been worse than the offense the last couple of years. And they don't have, like, the talisman quarterback coming back, kind of like the Cam Brown situation. It really has got to be a 4-quarter offense as well. And what I mean by this is they were 51 points in the third quarter in 2025, 53 points in the fourth quarter. Contrast that, opponents scored 114 in the third quarter and 127 in the fourth. Some of those came in some lopsided, a lot of that, the Ole Miss game got out of hand. So it's not even just the spread of the difference there, but there were games that they had opportunities in that the second half, the offense just did not keep it going for the full 4 quarters. I'll mention that shootout South Alabama. The Memphis game. That was a 1-point lead for Memphis at the half. It was 17-16. They hit that field goal at halftime. Offense didn't score in the second half of that game.
And in both of those games, like, we're not just talking about, like, oh, Georgia State was in them, just kind of, no. Like, the offense looked good up until that point. Yeah. I think the series before the field goal from Memphis, they kind of sputtered and, like, never kicked it back into gear the rest of the game. But, like, that's your point,
Right, and then I'd also throw the Georgia Southern road game. Kind of the second part of the Cam Brown arrival. Like, that offense was looking really good for like 2.5 quarters, 3 quarters against the Eagles down in Statesboro. And then the fourth quarter just got away from them. And they lose by 17 in the game that they were in for large stretches of that game. And even the Murray State game. They just scored a touchdown apiece in each of the third and fourth quarters. That is why that score was maybe not what you're hoping for. You only win by 16 against the FCS team. That feels like the other part of it, just as we're looking at macro with the offense of, like, it just was not a second half offense last year, and I feel like the coaching adjustments things gets a little overplayed as far as, like, that there's these tinkering that coaches need to do to keep it fresh and change it up after the first half. But certainly when you look at the numbers, Georgia State was not as effective an offense in the second half, and that can't be the case this year. You've got to find a way to get through 4 quarters. And to tie it all back together to the thing that I think is just like the thing for the offense, running the ball, being better on third down will play a big part in that happening. You do those things well, stay on the field, keep your defense on the sideline resting up. All of those are formulas for everyone staying on front foot in the second halves of games, staying on the field, being able to score, being able to, whether it's keep up with opponents or if you've got a lead, nurse it, add to it, close out games. It just, they were often trailing, but even in the games that they were not trailing last year when they had a shot, the offense was not going to be able to play its part. Even when earlier in the game, they had looked pretty good, which, being just brutal, there were times that was not the case. There were times that the offense just was 4 quarters not being that great, but there were spots and moments, and there were games where the offense delivered what you were looking for, just not for all 4 quarters. And that's what I think you're really hoping to see in 2026.
Yeah, I want us to get back to being able to talk about the margins, because they've got a lot of the things that we're talking about here. That sounds bad, but like, no, you know what I mean? You know, I want us to be able to nitpick certain things. Yeah,
this has not been like, we were talking about what was going on with the Georgia State rushing attack in years that they led the league in rushing yards. So it's like, we aren't at that point. It's like, you need to establish a baseline that is above where you're at right now, and we're just gonna have to see. Like I say, if this is a bowl team, which obviously is always going to sound crazy, you're talking about at least 5 wins of improvement after a 1-win season. I think the most likely case is that it will be because the offense takes a quantum leap and is scoring a lot of points, and you're seeing Cam Brown bandied about as one of the better quarterbacks in the Sun Belt Conference. And it won't just be a factor of him being better. It's also going to have to be because the run game's better, pass catcher step up to replace Ted Hurst. A lot of factors that is not just about relying on your quarterback, which I think can be a dangerous thing if that's all you've got. It's going to take, it's a cliche, it's going to take all 11 guys to kind of manufacture it. The coaching staff sticking to a plan, having the right plan, sticking to a philosophy. And I think if you are able to do all those things, the offense is more than marginally better, that will give them a shot in a lot of the games on their schedule. And that it might not be a team that is, if the defense doesn't look a whole lot better, or even if it's just they're still averaging in the 30s allowed, that looks something like the 2019 team, Georgia State. Like, if you're in that conversation, that was a team that got to a bowl game by October because they were just scoring a bunch of points. I think that's what you're hoping for with the offense, is you can win some games with the offense when the talent was there the last couple of years, but they were not really in that conversation. I think this bunch, it could be. I think that's your optimism case, is that the offense leads the way. You've got the pieces. We're just going to have to see how they all come together in the fall.
Yeah, you know, I mean, this might be a pretty tough bar just considering where they were last year, but to the way that I look at it for right now is they have to be essentially a touchdown better than they were last year. And I mean, we're just talking about them getting from 19 a game to 26, you know. I'm checking right now. Just for a point of reference, Kennesaw was 26.7 per game last year, you know, and like, yes, I don't say that because they won their conference, but like, that was the 75th ranked scoring offense in the country. You know, I'm asking you to go from the 119 to the 70s, you know, like,
right.
That's a jump, but like, that should be a manageable jump with some of the things that we've talked about today.
That might still be a team that you're like sweating every week and you don't know that you're going to make a bowl game, but I mean, we knew from September that this team wasn't going to make a bowl last year, and so that would be an improvement. And I think the offense, there's opportunity there, and there's some guys that could emerge that could be really exciting players. Where you look across, I mean, obviously Georgia State picked last in the Sun Belt, no one on the all-conference team. I see these kind of lists of like whether it's Athlon or whether just people on Twitter putting together like their rankings. There aren't a lot of Georgia State people on those rankings. Even at skill position where Ted Hurst was a guy last year. I think it's fair because guys haven't. You can't point to, oh, this is the guy because this is what he did last year. But I think there are those guys on the roster, and so by season's end, there could be some new household names for Georgia State. I think that's also kind of the hope if you were hoping for success in 2026. That you start to see some of these guys that work their way into that conversation and start to show who they are as players on the football field. I can't promise nearly the kind of rosy picture next week. I mean, just it is what it is. The defense hasn't been there, but I will say this, and I didn't get into the media days. There are a couple of nuggets I was saving for the defensive side of the ball, including what has to be the furthest job interview that's ever been done in Georgia State history when John Hanline joined the staff. There's been meaningful change there in how they put the roster and the staff together, and so it's kind of going to still be, well, we've got to see it because this last year they were giving up 37 a game and it just wasn't nearly competitive enough. But we will get into the defense in greater detail next week and just the new faces in there, what we can glean about what the defense is going to look like and what that could possibly mean for an improvement in 2026 for Georgia State. And whatever else comes across our desk, still promising the basketball is going to get its due, aside from little schedule announcements here and there. We will get to it all and more. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Thursday Night Podcast, and we will catch you next time.